Another big Hillary Clinton lie blows up the political scene. Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona is on his way out, and he slams the door on his way out. We'll talk about all of that. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. So a couple of huge news items that I want to go through today in detail, give you my perspective on them, and give you a little bit of background so that you know what you're talking about when you talk about it at the water cooler today. But before we get to that, first I want to say thank you to our sponsors over at Helix Sleep. So there are a lot of places that you can get an online mattress. The only place that you should go is to my friends over at Helix Sleep. If you go to helixsleep.com/Ben, you take their simple 2 to 3 minute sleep quiz. They ask you, your height, your weight, your body type. Do you like the mattress to be firm, or do you like it to be softer? Do you like it to be breathable? Do you like it to be kind of heat absorbent? They built a custom mattress that will be the best thing you've ever slept on. We had a more expensive mattress in our bedroom, and then they sent us the Helix Sleep mattress, and the more expensive mattress was banished to the other room because Helix Sleep is just that good. For couples, they can even personalize both sides of the mattress. Everyone from GQ to Cosmo to the New York Times are talking about Helix, and you'll know why once you try it out. Plus, it's risk-free. When your custom mattress arrives to your door, they send it to you in a box, you unpack it, it immediately inflates because it's foam, and shipping is completely free. You can try it for 100 nights, and if you don't like it, they'll pick it up and refund you in full. Go to helixsleep.com/Ben right now, and you get $50 toward your custom mattress. That is helixsleep.com/Ben for $50 off your order. Again, that's helixsleep.com/Ben. They also have a bunch of other great products, like they have the Helix Mattress Protector and the Helix Foundation. Now, all these things are just terrific products. Check it out over at helixsleep.com/Ben. Get $50 toward your custom mattress and sleep better at night. Okay, so something that may not have you sleeping well at night, and certainly doesn't have Hillary Clinton sleeping well at night, is a story that is breaking out from the Washington Post last night. So you need a little bit of background to understand what exactly is going on here. So first I have to explain to you what the Trump-Russia dossier is. If you remember back to earlier this year, BuzzFeed released a dossier that was full of information, some of it more credible than others. People have been saying that the entire dossier has been debunked. That is not true. Some of the dossier has actually been substantiated. Some of the dossier has not. The parts that were not substantiated included the absurd allegation that Donald Trump went to Moscow and rented a room that the Obamas stayed in and then had a bunch of Russian prostitutes come in and pee all over the bed, right? That was P-gate, if you recall this. It was ridiculous. We made fun of it. That, of course, is not true, or at least there's no evidence to that effect. If there were, then that would be the greatest political story in the history of mankind. But it is not. So in any case, that dossier comes out from BuzzFeed earlier this year. And it came out because it had been presented, the dossier, to President Trump, or at least a summary of the allegations had been presented to President Trump by then FBI Director James Comey just before Trump became president of the United States. So where did this dossier come from? The reason people were asking this is because there were concerns that maybe the Russians had basically been putting out bad info, and that bad info had been used by the Obama administration as an excuse to wiretap all of Trump's friends. Right? This is the allegations. The allegation is, and it's more of a conspiracy theory than an allegation, that the Russians were using Christopher Steele basically as a cutout. This is the spy who's responsible for the compilation of the dossier, that he knew that the Russians were giving him bad information. He put it in the dossier, which was funded by the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. That dossier was then provided to the Obama FBI, and the Obama FBI used that as an excuse to wiretap people like Carter Page, the Trump foreign policy advisor, or Mike Flynn, the one-time Trump national security advisor. That's the allegation anyway. There are a few pieces of evidence that have to be there in order for this allegation to hold true. One, we have to show that Christopher Steele, the spy, actually was being played by the Russians. Number two, we have to show that the DNC and Hillary knew that Christopher Steele was being played by the Russians. That would look like collusion, right? The sort of collusion that Democrats have been accusing Trump of. And three, we would have to show that the FBI, in bad faith, went after people like Carter Page and people like Mike Flynn based on evidence they knew was shoddy in order to target them. That contention is pretty extreme, considering that, again, if the Democrats were really focused on just getting out bad information about Trump, then why would this dossier not have come out in, say, September of 2016, like before the election? It didn't. So here is the full timeline on the Trump-Russia dossier. So Wikipedia actually has a pretty good timeline here, so I'll use that as the basis for this. In September 2015, there was a wealthy Republican donor who opposed Trump's candidacy in the Republican primary. So he went to Fusion GPS and asked them to compile an Oppo research file. For months they did. Okay, then this Republican donor, after Trump won the nomination, the Republican donor basically dropped out. And that's when, in April 2016, the investigation, contract, and funding was taken over by a law firm called Perkins Coie, owned by Mark Elias. or Elias. He's the lawyer who represented both the DNC and the Clinton presidential campaign. So the Hillary campaign knew, the DNC knew, the Hillary people are claiming they didn't know. That's really not credible. And it was not until after Elias came on board that Christopher Steele was hired as the dossier compiler. So the claim has been basically that even Mark Elias didn't know Steele was the guy compiling the dossier. That's a little bit weak. In June 2016, it was revealed the DNC had been hacked by Russian sources, so Fusion GPS hired Orbis Business Intelligence, which is a private British intelligence firm, to look into the Russian connections, and that investigation was undertaken by Steele. That's how Steele gets involved. He only gets involved after the Democrats take over the funding for the Trump-Russia dossier. He delivers his report in a series of memos. From June through September. He believed the FBI was not taking it seriously, and so it ended up in the hands of John McCain, among other people, who brought it to the FBI, and finally James Comey in January 2017 brings it to the attention of President Trump. That's the timeline on the Trump-Russia dossier. So it is not correct when the media say that the Republicans funded the Steele dossier. That's not technically true. They funded the beginning of the investigation before Steele was involved. When the Republicans, when conservatives say that this was obvious collusion between Hillary Clinton and the Russian government, again, no evidence to that effect. In fact, there is much more evidence that Donald Trump Jr., for example, was attempting to make nice with the Russians than that Hillary Clinton was attempting to make nice with the Russians, at least insofar as this. She was attempting to make nice with the Russians in all likelihood with regard to selling 20% of America's uranium stockpile. But with regard to gathering Trump Oppo intel research, not any evidence to support that. Also, the idea that the FBI was acting on orders from the Kremlin in order to get Trump, that also seems like a bit of a stretch. The reason that I lay all of this out is because I want you to have the truth about what exactly is happening here. Right? I think that there's a lot of lies being told by both sides. On the left, they're saying, this is no big deal at all. You know, Oppo research is Oppo research. What's the big deal? The big deal is that if you knew, and we don't know the answer to this yet, if you knew the Oppo research was based on Russian intel and the Russians were funneling that intel to Christopher Steele, then it looks like collusion. So we just don't know the answer to that one yet. On the right, the same answer applies. We don't know the answer to that one yet, so you can't assume that such collusion was taking place in the first place. So here's what the Washington Post reported, and here's the key component. Okay, Mark Elias apparently lied to the New York Times about his involvement in the dossier. So apparently, he told Maggie Haberman of the New York Times he was not involved in the compilation of the dossier at all. He suggested the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign did not fund the dossier. That turns out to be false. The Washington Post reports that last night, the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee helped fund research that resulted in a now famous dossier containing allegations about President Trump's connections to Russia and possible coordination between his campaign and the Kremlin, people familiar with the matter said. Mark Elias, a lawyer representing the Clinton campaign and the DNC, retained Fusion GPS, a Washington firm, to conduct the research. After that, Fusion GPS hired dossier author Christopher Steele, a former British intel officer with ties to the FBI and the U.S. intelligence community. So Maggie Haberman was getting all sorts of crap over at the New York Times because yesterday, after this came out, she tweeted out, quote, "Folks involved in funding this lied about it and with sanctimony for a year." Now, it just shows you that the rabid left is just as bad as some of the more rabid people on the right. They went after Maggie Haberman tooth and nail for this. So Mark Elias lied to her. She said he lied to me, and she's the bad guy, right? She's the problem here, Maggie Haberman, who has been thoroughly Trump skeptical from the start. In any case, it says Fusion GPS officials had pled the fifth before the House Intel Committee to avoid answering funding questions. So there's still questions. Why was the DNC and why were Hillary hiding this, right? That's the big question here. What do they have to hide? Because they were lying about it for months or taking the fifth. Like, what's the big deal? Why didn't they just come up front and say, listen, sure, we funded an Oppo research file. Sure, Christopher Steele was one of those guys. So? I mean, if the implication is, well, they were using foreign sources to gather intel, we already knew that from Hillary's camp. They were using the Ukrainian government to gather foreign intel. We know that. Politico reported it last year. So, again, the real question here is, as always with the Clintons, what are they trying to hide? The Clintons are so bad at covering things up that whenever they cover things up, the cover-up ends up being worse than the original crime, right? Hillary did this with regard to the Whitewater papers. Hillary's still the only first lady in American history to be fingerprinted by the FBI. Hillary Clinton did this with regard to her email chains, right? She deleted 33,000 emails, then claimed it was completely innocent. Every clumsy attempt to obfuscate the truth ends up making people more and more suspicious. There's a reason to be suspicious around here. There's a reason to be suspicious about all of this. There's also reason to be suspicious because it's not like Fusion GPS hasn't worked with the Russians before. So William Browder is a businessman who pushed for sanctions on Russia. He's testified in the past that the Russian government used Fusion GPS before to conduct a smear campaign against him personally. Browder admitted he couldn't connect Russian funding to the anti-Trump dossier, which means President Trump's theory of FBI Democratic-Russian collusion is not supported by the evidence, but certain key Democrats did apparently lie about the Fusion GPS report funding, and the question is why. So that question remains an open question. And now the Democrats are pushing back by saying, listen, this is just an effort to discredit the dossier entirely. Well, yes, it is. I mean, by some people on the right, I think it is a disingenuous effort to say that everything in the dossier has already been discredited. As I say, some of it has been discredited, some of it has not. But there are serious open questions on both sides of this. One, what in the dossier is true? Two, was Steele being used by the Russians? Three, did the Democratic Party know that Steele was being used by the Russians? And four, why did the Democrats lie about all of this if it was just an innocent Oppo research attempt? Right. So here is Adam Schiff, who's a very militant anti-Trump guy, California representative, and he says that this entire story is just an effort to discredit Christopher Steele.
Christopher Steele, no matter who is paying for his services, may have discovered before our own intelligence agencies that the Russians were going to interfere in our election on behalf of Donald Trump. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of a lot of the claims in the dossier, but I don't think it really adds much value to know who paid for it necessarily. And I view this as part of the effort to discredit him, which really doesn't advance the investigation.
Okay, so Adam Schiff making the case that this is all just obfuscation. Well, it may all be obfuscation, but the Clinton campaign has some questions to answer. Now, a lot of people are doing this routine like, well, Hillary Clinton's not president, so who cares? Why is it a big deal? If Hillary's not president, what exactly are you whining about? And the answer is, if she had been president, you'd be saying it's beneath her to answer these questions. So wrongdoing is still wrongdoing. And again, it does shed light on the Russian collusion stuff if, in fact, it turns out that the FBI used this dossier as the basis to wiretap people like Carter Page and Mike Flynn, and it was done in corrupt fashion with the help of the Russian government. We just don't have that information at this point. Any suggestions to the contrary are not true. Okay, any suggestions to the contrary that the conspiracy theories have been confirmed, not true. So let's not get out in front of the story. Okay, I want to get to Jeff Flake resigning from the Senate in just a moment. But first, I want to say thank you to our sponsors over at the U.S. Concealed Carry Association. So we always hear the stories in the news about the guy who shoots an intruder in his house, and we think that's the end of the story, right? It's all over.